The body lines began in peacetime, curves for comfort, symmetry for grace. Then, in 1940, those same lines were drawn again, squared, thickened, raised for clearance, and fitted with armour plate. The Humber Heavy Utility FWD was born not in luxury's image, but from its bones. Luxury had gone to war. Once the name Humber stood for refinement on British roads, the quiet hum of the Super Snipe along the Mall, a chauffeur's cap glinting in a polished window. Then, overnight, that same mark found itself summoned to serve. The ministry needed staff cars, liaison vehicles, rolling offices, machines that could think with their passengers. And so a company known for comfort built a car for command. By 1941, in workshops at Coventry, the familiar Super Snipe chassis was lifted, reinforced, and driven through the forge of necessity. Civilian grace was translated into military grammar. Leather was replaced by steel, polish by paint, the hush of a saloon by the low mechanical growl of four-wheel drive. This was not a limousine. It was a box on wheels, but one carrying authority, papers, radios, and the decisions of war. Across North Africa, then Italy, then north again through France and the Low Countries, its angular shadow kept pace with the tide of the British Army. It was seen wherever orders moved faster than telephone lines, wherever command needed a room but found only open ground. The paradox was complete. A luxury mark re-engineered itself into an instrument of endurance, and in doing so defined how a modern army would move. By the time Europe fell silent, the Humber FWD had become more than a vehicle. It was the architecture of decision on wheels, a proof that comfort, stripped of indulgence, could still carry power. The question remains, when refinement becomes function, what survives of either? Fade on desert light crossing an unpolished bonnet. Luxury, remade for duty. Before the desert winds carried the sound of engines across Africa, the British Army faced a quieter crisis: mobility. Headquarters could plan, but it could not move. Staff cars of the 1930s, fine on gravel drives, broke their axles in dust. Trucks were strong but crude, built to haul men and rations, not maps and messages. What the Army needed was a space between the two, a vehicle civilized enough to serve as an office, strong enough to survive a war. Factories already knew speed. Now they had to learn endurance. The call went to Coventry, to Roots Group, the parent of Humber, Hillman, and Sunbeam Talbot. Its pre-war line had symbolized British reliability. Now it was told to build a command car for a continent without roads. Built for roads became a room for war. The design order was spare and absolute: a four-wheel drive chassis capable of carrying armour plate and 3 men with papers and radios, protection against dust and shrapnel, stability at low speed on sand. Comfort was an afterthought, yet comfort would reappear in unexpected ways. Humber engineers started not with a military frame, but with the company's most refined civilian one, the Super Snipe. They stripped its saloon body, shortened the overhangs, added a driven front axle, and reinforced every joint. The first prototype ran in 1940, a boxy shape sitting high on heavy tyres. The Army approved. Production began the next spring. Coventry built machines in the shadow of air raid sirens. The city that produced refinement now forged resilience. Workers who once fitted walnut trim now riveted armour plate. The transformation was as literal as it was symbolic, the creation of utility from decay. At the same time, the wider war defined its context. The British Expeditionary Force had lost almost all its vehicles at Dunkirk. Re-equipment was not luxury, it was survival. North Africa would test every new design in heat and dust that mocked theory. Tanks and guns moved the front, staff cars and utilities moved the plan. The Humber FWD appeared just as the desert campaign demanded reliability over glamour. Box-sided, 5-doored, with a split tailgate that could fold into a desk, it offered space enough for a map, a lamp and 2 officers. It was not fast, but it could go where sedans could not. The War Office called it the Heavy Utility FWD. Crews called it the Humber box. Not all Humbers were the same, and the distinction mattered. The Super Snipe staff car, familiar in photographs with generals at parades, was rear-wheel drive, a vehicle of ceremony and short distance. The light reconnaissance car, with its low armoured hull and turret, was built for patrols. The Heavy Utility FWD sat between them, not elegant, not armed, but essential. It carried command itself. In correspondence, officers described it without flourish. A reliable staff vehicle for unfavourable terrain. That understatement hid the revolution it represented. Before it, the army thought of command as static, a tent, a table, a telephone. After it, command moved on wheels. Its construction balanced paradoxes. Armour enough to deflect splinters, but thin enough to avoid weight. A luxury car engine detuned for endurance. 4-wheel drive adapted from Canadian practice, but manufactured entirely in Britain. The result looked civilian only at distance. Up close, the seams told a different story. Plates spot-welded for speed, brackets cast rather than machined, paint thick enough to hide the economy of wartime metal. The first deliveries went to Middle East Command in 1941. There, among sand, rock and sudden rain, the Humber proved what design could and could not do. The enclosed body kept dust from documents and wind from radios. The high stance prevented bogging. The roofline, once designed to give passengers headroom, now allowed men to work inside without stooping. It was a luxury of function, not of indulgence. Every campaign that followed carried its marks. Crews learned that the flat panels made easy repair. 1 bolt out, 1 new plate in. Field workshops kept spares ready like clockwork parts. No 2 Humbers returned with the same paint. Each carried a geography of repairs, dents and dust. Creation became adaptation, adaptation decay, and decay creation again. By the end of 1942, the Army knew what it had built. The Humber FWD was not a truck and not a car. It was an office for a war that would never again be fought from a desk. In the archives of the Roots Group, the language of war and the language of craft share the same page. One memo reads simply, "Requirement, heavy utility, 4-wheel drive, to seat 3 with equipment, designed for continuous operation." Below it, in a different hand, "must be able to be driven by a man of ordinary skill." That phrase defined the vision. Simplicity by necessity. The design team was not a military office, but a group of civilian engineers who had spent a decade refining comfort. Now, under blackout conditions and sandbagged windows, they reversed their instincts. Every refinement of the Super Snipe had to be reconsidered. Chrome gave way to paint, curved panels to straight ones, luxury wood to reinforce steel. The brief was to preserve reliability while erasing ornament. The first sketches of the Humber FWD show an unfamiliar silhouette, upright, unadorned, practical. The bonnet remained recognizably Humber, but above the wheels the shape became geometric, almost architectural. Function dictated form, doors large enough for an officer in field dress, a roof high enough for radio operation, a rear body long enough to carry charts, files, and wireless sets. Roots engineers referred to it as a mobile office, not a vehicle. They understood that the front line had moved from trenches to logistics. Mobility was no longer a support function, it was the method of command. The army would think on the move, and this machine would provide the space to do it. The design team drew on what they already knew. The Super Snipe chassis offered proven strength. The straight-six engine produced consistent torque. Humber's reputation for craftsmanship reassured the War Office that production could meet precision. But this time, elegance was not the goal. Endurance was. Panels were designed flat so that any unit with sheet metal could repair them. Doors were identical left and right to simplify spares. The split tailgate doubled as a desk. Every part had to justify its existence. Test reports from 1941 described the early prototypes as well-mannered for their weight. That phrase, a holdover from civilian motoring language, hints at the transitional mindset. Humber was learning to think in military terms while still speaking in the vocabulary of civility. The company that once advertised quiet authority on the road was now designing literal authority on wheels. The engineers faced constraints that defined the vehicle's identity. Weight had to stay under 3 tons for bridging limits. Armour plate could not exceed 8 millimeters on the sides and roof. The cabin needed ventilation, but no dust ingress. These specifications shaped a paradox: a sealed box that still breathed, heavy enough to resist fragments, yet light enough for desert tracks. The solution lay in balance. Not too much of anything, just enough of everything. Witnesses later recalled the moment the prototype moved under its own power in the yard at Coventry. The factory was half dark from rationed electricity. Workers watched through gaps in blackout curtains as the square-bodied prototype rolled past. It looked slow, but it moved with purpose. "Like a building deciding to leave," one fitter said years later. Minimalist by design, the Humber FWD achieved something unintended but vital: psychological steadiness. Officers working inside spoke of a sense of enclosure, a private room in a public war. The shape gave reassurance, the kind that comes from having walls in a landscape without any. In photographs, its panels reflect light as if they belong to another material altogether. Not armour, not tin, but something between, a compromise that keeps men thinking. The War Office approved the pattern and authorised mass production. Roots subcontracted bodywork to coach builders who once made limousines. They worked in near silence, with machines muffled under sandbags to hide the noise from enemy bombers. In that hush, the vision of the car solidified, a luxury craft turned instrument of endurance. The Humber Heavy Utility was never meant to impress. It was meant to persist. In doing so, it carried forward the spirit of its ancestry: quiet competence, redefined by circumstance. The lines that once promised comfort now promised control. When the first shipment left Britain for Egypt, each vehicle bore a small plate inside the cabin: Humber, Roots Group, Coventry. No slogans, no motto, just the maker's name and the year of manufacture. It was a reminder that even in total war, identity mattered. The Humber 4x4 was more than a machine. It was a philosophy in metal, that discipline could replace luxury, and that clarity of purpose was itself a form of design. Factory number 1. Ryton on Dunsmore, Coventry, January 1941. The sirens stop, the lathes start. Men file past the crater outside the foundry and clock in without comment. Every machine smells faintly of oil and burnt paint, the scent of a city rebuilding itself between raids. On one wall hangs a blueprint without ornament: Heavy Utility FWD, general arrangement. Metal arrives from foundries already pitted by shrapnel. Steel sheets are measured not by gauge, but by what remains deliverable. Aluminium is scarce, brass nearly gone. Everything that can be replaced by mild steel is. Frames are cut on jigs once used for saloon cars. Rivet lines double where welders demand certainty. Each chassis carries the ghost of a Humber Super Snipe. Longer rails, same mounting points, now boxed for strength. The elegant arc of a touring car becomes a square. Engines come from Stoke. Straight 6, 4.1 litres, 90 horsepower. The same block that once moved ministers now moves maps. Mechanics fit military spec magnetos, waterproof carburettors, twin fuel filters. The handwriting on one checklist reads, tolerance plus or minus 0.002 inches. It's both ambition and defiance. Assembly follows rhythm more than speed. Chassis up, axles fixed. Transfer case aligned by feel. Body lowered, 8 bolts, torque in sequence. Doors hung, heavy, square, accurate to a 1/4 inch. Nothing glamorous, but everything exact. The 4-wheel drive system is borrowed from Canadian practice and re-engineered in British measure. Gears are cut shallow to reduce noise. Lubrication channels widened for desert heat. The first batch shows vibration at 35 miles per hour. Roots engineers spend 3 nights tracing resonance through the frame. They find it in a cross member drilled 2 holes too wide. By morning, the correction is standardized across all jigs. Paint shops operate under blackout. Sprayers wear respirators made from gauze and twine. Olive, drab by day, looks black by lamplight. Panels hang like unlit mirrors, row after row. Women workers step between them with steady hands, applying thickness that must both conceal and protect. Testing moves outdoors. The proving ground is a churn of clay and chalk. Drivers wear goggles. Dust clouds follow each start. The car pitches, sways, steadies. Differential locks engage with a click that feels final. Mechanics crouch with notebooks. Front springs okay, rear bump stop modified. Tyre pressures 20/28 inside, fittings are sparse. 3 seats, metal floor, dash stripped to essentials. Oil, water, amps, speed, fuel. A small brass plate, made by Humber Ltd, Coventry. No slogans, no emblem, no veneer. Every few weeks an inspector from the War Office arrives in a blackout Morris and walks the floor with a clipboard. His questions are procedural, his presence absolute. Production quotas are not targets, they are orders. A line worker remembers, we built by the siren. When it sounded, we stopped and waited. When it stopped, we went back to work. Each cycle measured not in hours, but in impacts. Hammer strike, air raid, shift end. By mid-1941, output stabilizes at 30 vehicles a week. Bodies travel by night convoy to assembly. Completed units leave under canvas tarpaulins marked only FWD. Rail cars carry them south to docks under escort. At Southampton, stevedores load them between crates of Bren carriers and Bedford trucks. On each tailgate, in white stencil, a unit serial, HUFWDXXX. The code will outlast the paint. The workers never see them again. They hear rumours that the cars arrived in Egypt, that they stood in dust storms, that they were liked. Proof arrives months later as a photograph clipped from a newspaper, a square-sided Humber in desert light, a man writing on its tailgate desk. Someone pins it to the notice board. The caption reads, British staff car in service. No names, no credit, just evidence that the work held. The build process becomes repetition, and repetition becomes resilience. Measure, fit, strike, check, move on. By the end of 1942, thousands of frames have passed through the line. Each carries the imprint of a city that learned to keep making things under threat. Coventry's skyline is jagged now, but its factories still breathe. What they produce is not luxury, not beauty, but certainty. Steel cut to tolerance becomes reliability, reliability becomes mobility, mobility becomes command. At night, when the power drops and the machines stop mid-turn, a few workers sit on the frames waiting for the lights to come back. the still warm metal gives off a faint, steady heat. The same warmth will radiate later from engines idling in another continent. The Humber 4x4 is built from that rhythm: impact, pause, continuation, creation against interruption. Morning in the Western Desert. A column of new Humber 4x4s idles outside an improvised workshop near Mersa Matruh. Oil temperature 65 degrees Celsius, water 85. Tyre pressure 22 front, 24 rear. Distance to trial area 5 miles. Visibility hazy, wind east. Start recorded at 0700 hours. Each vehicle carries 3 men: driver, signaller, officer. Inside, the air smells of metal and dust filters. The driver checks transfer case engaged. The signaller secures the number. 11 set between 2 brackets bolted to the floor. No talking. The engine note is conversation enough. Low gear. Clutch forward. The box moves. The desert is an exam without a paper. Heat tests coolant. Sand tests bearings. Distance tests the human spine. At 20 miles an hour, the Humber rides with unexpected composure. At 30, it shakes like a drawer full of tools. Vibration recorded. Amplitude 4 mm at dash, 7 mm at roof. Engine steady. Dust intrusion minimal. A captain notes in pencil: handles as truck, steers as car. Noise moderate. Visibility fair. It is the language of approval without praise. He adds, radio clear to 6 miles. Beyond that, interference, signal and silence trade control. Each halt becomes a lesson. Engines off, doors open, heat pours out like breath. Tires checked, fan belts tightened, filter oiled. The officer unfolds a map on the tailgate. The driver holds a corner with his thumb. Inside, the Humber is order, a room the wind cannot enter. By midday, the temperature is 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Steel expands, doors swell against their frames. Nothing breaks. Every movement is measured in sound. The thump of sand under tires, the constant note of the engine, the brief crack of the radio. When the wireless fails, the vehicles become their own network, a chain of motion carrying intent where signals cannot reach. At El Daba, the trials turn official. Distance run 500 miles, average speed 17 miles per hour. Fuel consumption 1 gallon per 8.3 miles. Cooling system stable. Dust sealing rated good maintenance intervals set. Engine oil every 600 miles. Filters every 200. A new discipline is born. Routine as survival. Crews learn rituals. Never park facing down slope. Never idle too long in sand. Check wheel nuts at dawn. Tie a rag over the fuel pump when it boils. These instructions spread by word rather than paper. The vehicle teaches its users. Photographs from 1942 show the Humber against light that turns everything to geometry. Flat panels, hard shadows, a small square of shade under the open tailgate where a hand writes orders. No heroism, just procedure made visible. Mechanical tactile. The feel of switches cut from bakelite, the click of gear engagement, the sudden heavier steer when four-wheel drive locks. Men remember textures more than numbers. Later they will say, it sounded right. Data surge resumes, pressure 20 pounds per square inch. Oil clean, water full. Tyre tread 0.75 inches. Chain lubrication satisfactory. Mileage since start 492. Breakdowns, none critical. In the language of wartime testing, that means success. At night, the convoy parks nose to tail and the desert becomes quiet again. Engines tick as they cool. Men sleep beside their machines. Signal, silence, signal. The pattern repeats with each dawn. Within months of arrival in North Africa, the Humber 4x4 proves its worth. Commanders use it as a mobile liaison car between brigade and division. In a war of radio delays and missent messages, the vehicle becomes a physical form of communication. It turns time into distance and distance back into time. The War Office receives reports from Cairo. Performance under sand conditions excellent. Maintenance simple. Recommended for general issue. The machine that was born of luxury has become the standard of utility. Mechanics send feedback that refines later batches, improved ventilation, better sealing on rear doors, a revised mount for wireless equipment. Each suggestion folds back into production without delay. Creation still in motion. The desert tests do not end with numbers, but with habits. When a driver closes his door and feels the solid metal thunk, he knows it will open again later. When the engine catches first turn after a cold night, he knows someone in Coventry cut a bearing true. Faith by engineering. By 1943, the Humber FWD is part of the landscape, a square shape in a world of curves. It is never the subject of a war photograph, always the furniture of command just behind the subject. That is its victory. When the campaign moves north to Tunisia, the same vehicles go with it. Paint fades to the colour of dust. Engines grow soft with wear. Yet they still start. Some will serve 3 years without replacement. The factory's steel has proved its worth under conditions that break men. The final report from Middle East Command reads in precise type, Vehicle, Heavy Utility FWD, Humber. Field trials complete. Service use approved. No signature of celebration, just confirmation that function has become fact. The test ends where the war continues. A line of Humbers disappearing into heat, engines beating time for a moving headquarters. Signal fades, silence remains. The message is movement. The reports arrive first, then the results. Each field command writes its verdict in the same restrained tone: reliable, adaptable, maintainable. By 1943, the Humber Heavy Utility FWD is no longer on trial. It is procedure. From this point onward, the record becomes impersonal. The Army talks in forms, not opinions. All Corps HQs to be issued with FWD-type vehicles, Humber or equivalent. A decision disguised as an instruction. The machine has passed from design to doctrine. In Italy, the Humber trades sand for mud. Convoys climb through ruined villages and olive groves where rain turns roads to clay. Engines hum under tarpaulins. The square body that once reflected sun now absorbs rain. Drivers report condensation inside the windscreen, the price of being sealed against dust. Wipers squeak, heaters struggle, but the engine does not stop. Its performance in Italy is described with the same phrase used in Africa: adequate in all respects. To the War Office, that is victory. Failure would have a paragraph. Adequacy needs only a line. The role of the vehicle shifts with the front. It becomes an extension of the field table, a travelling post of paperwork and radio noise. Photographs from 1944 show officers bent under the tailgate, writing orders with rain dripping off the roof edge. The Humber is now part of the bureaucracy of war. Factories back home respond to new orders: fitment of blackout headlamps, reinforced rear doors, and a compartment for code equipment. The original 4.1-litre engine remains unchanged. The Army's mechanical branch declares it sufficient for purpose. The Humber is no longer a luxury derivative. It is a production tool, precise, predictable, and unremarkable in the way that perfection often is. The institutional voice grows louder. Reports shift from description to expectation. Standardization of Humber 4x4 utility to be maintained. Other makes to conform. Where possible, the car becomes policy. In northwest Europe, the Humber's endurance is measured in bridges crossed and towns occupied. Belgium, Holland, northern France, everywhere command travels, a box-bodied silhouette appears in the background of photographs. It is rarely captioned. The war has no space for sentiment about machines that merely work, yet its influence shows in the absence of complaint. The vehicles run. Crews rest inside while shells pass over. Radios hum. Headlights stay dark under covers. The car that once symbolized comfort now symbolizes continuity. At a forward HQ near Caen, an intelligence officer notes HQ operational throughout due to vehicle mobility. No delay in dispatches. That line, written in ink and lost among thousands of files, is the measure of its success. Each front produces variations. In Italy, they add wire mesh over lights. In Holland, deep tread tyres for floodplains. In France, canvas window covers against glass splinters. Adaptations so specific that no two Humbers finish the war alike. Field workshops become their second birthplaces. Mechanics swap panels, weld cracks, fit captured tyres. The body's straight geometry, so plain in design, makes every repair possible. That is where the genius of the car lies, in being rebuildable by anyone with a hammer and belief. Through 1944, as the army advances into Europe, Humbers carry the same weight they did in Africa, the documents that move divisions. When communication lines break, these boxes of steel become moving offices once again. Under shell fire, in rain, on roads cut by craters, they continue to arrive. There is no single breakthrough moment, no speech, no redesign. The victory of the Humber is cumulative. Every report without complaint is proof. Every photo without caption is tribute. By 1945, the Army Council lists it among essential staff vehicles and classifies the design as complete. No further development required. What began as a prototype in blackout Coventry now defines British staff mobility from Cairo to Hamburg. After the war, the same efficiency that made it indispensable will also make it redundant. Peacetime wants comfort again. Command returns to offices. The boxes will be sold, repainted, forgotten. But for the moment, in mud and dust, they remain essential. The institutional record is silent on sentiment, but the images say enough. A row of square silhouettes, each with a number stenciled on the door, each carrying the movement of an army that learned to think while moving. Built for elegance became endurance. Born from luxury became necessity. The dual clause repeats until it feels final. In the chaos of demobilization, records vanish faster than vehicles. Many of the files that tracked the Humber FWD's production, allocation, and field performance were pulped in 1946, recycled into stationery for the peace that followed. Records destroyed, the index says, no longer required. The machines survived longer than their memory. The war ended, and Britain shrank its army. Thousands of Humber 4x4s stood in depots from Hamburg to Cairo. Engines drained, tyres flat, paperwork unsigned. Their value was in mobility, their flaw was victory. The machine designed for endless movement suddenly had nowhere to go. The Ministry of Supply classified them as vehicles of temporary military utility. They were to be sold or scrapped. Some went to police forces, others to foreign armies rebuilding from ruins, Holland, Belgium, Denmark. A few became ambulances, radio vans, or mobile offices for reconstruction teams. Many simply rusted where they stood. Memory fades faster than paint. In the new Europe, rebuilt roads made them obsolete. The Humber 4x4 was designed for terrain that no longer existed, yet its legacy seeped quietly into post-war industry. The lessons of its box body and four-wheel drive filtered into civilian designs, utility as architecture, not ornament. Land Rover engineers studying war surplus vehicles in 1947 noted the value of flat panels and rebuildable structure. they were describing the Humber without naming it. Meanwhile, in factories once lit by bomb damage, peace brought another kind of silence. The Roots Group returned to saloons and luxury. The Humber Hawk, the Pullman limousine, elegant names for a nation trying to forget austerity. The company never advertised its wartime service. The car that had carried command did not fit the story of renewal. In the RAF and Commonwealth forces, a few remained on inventory lists into the 1950s, repainted in blue or olive drab, stripped of armour, used as runabouts at airfields and depots. No one called them by name anymore. They were simply Humber 4x4, old type. The few photographs that survive show quiet scenes. A Dutch officer leaning on the bonnet during occupation duty, a radio aerial still fixed to its mount, a driver cleaning the windscreen with a rag. Nothing heroic. But in those images, the vehicle remains unbroken. Records destroyed in 1946, but not all traces lost. Restoration enthusiasts decades later would rediscover chassis plates, fragments of correspondence, and unit markings hidden under layers of later paint. From these, they reconstructed histories once deemed too ordinary to preserve. The mechanical facts remained where paper failed: frame numbers, gear ratios, steel composition. The past was recoverable through touch rather than text. Memory became reconstruction. Forgetting became curiosity. Every restored Humber FWD today carries two histories: the visible one of survival and the invisible one of use. Weld seams that tell of field repairs in Tunisia, bolt heads filed by hand in Coventry, paint colours changed from desert sand to European green. The machine becomes its own archive. The hidden consequence of its success was doctrinal, not mechanical. By proving that command could move, it ended the static headquarters forever. The British Army reorganised its structure after 1945 around the principle of mobility in communication. Post-war command vehicles, from the Austin K9 to the Bedford RL, followed its pattern: space for papers, radios, and authority on the move. The Humber 4x4 taught armies how to think operationally while driving. That shift would shape conflicts from Korea to Suez, carried forward not by the car itself, but by the doctrine it enabled. There's another consequence: industrial, quieter, but profound. The post-war car industry learned standardization from the war's utilities. Humber's wartime production line showed that flat panels and shared fittings meant repair, not replacement. That logic underpinned Britain's export vehicles for a generation. In that sense, every working van, every post-war utility, carries a faint echo of the Humber Heavy Utility, the box that proved geometry could win wars. When the last units were struck off charge, no ceremony marked the end. Scrap men lifted their square bodies with cranes, cut them open for steel. The sound, torch against armour, closed a chapter no one thought needed writing. The paradox of memory repeats: the more ordinary the machine, the more invisible its achievement. But invisibility is its legacy. The Humber 4x4 existed so others could be seen. The generals, the signals, the movements. A handful survive now, silent under museum lights, paint polished, glass replaced, engines started only for demonstration. Their sound is softer than memory allows. Yet when the clutch engages and the box moves forward, even slowly, it carries an echo of command, the sound of a war that taught luxury how to work. Decades later, the Humber FWD exists in fragments, not as a fleet, but as memory made metal. Museums hold a few examples, restorers a few more. Each still carries the same presence: a square body standing apart from the curved silhouettes of civilian cars. To look at one today is to see function without disguise. Its paint tells time. The early desert sand sits beneath later olive, and beneath that, primer grey, the first coat sprayed in blackout. Restoration reveals history in layers, the way tree rings tell drought from rain. Every scratch on its armor plate once meant a delivery completed, an order signed, a mile earned. The Humber 4x4 did not end with the war. It dissolved into its descendants. Land Rover engineers studied surplus Humbers during their first design meetings in 1947. The prototype, HUE 166, copied its logic. Flat panels for field repair, box body for strength, four-wheel drive for certainty. The Humber had proved that utility could be manufactured like luxury, simple on the surface, exact in its geometry. From that idea came Britain's new industrial identity. The line that once built command cars built peacetime vehicles for farms, factories, and exploration. The war's discipline became design language. In military memory, the Humber 4x4 became a placeholder, a forgotten predecessor to later command vehicles, but its influence remained physical. The Bedford and Austin 4x4s that followed used its chassis layout, its cabin ergonomics, its concept of command in motion. The difference was that those later machines were remembered because they came after peace. The Humber belonged to the noise before silence. Echo line, built for luxury, became endurance. Collectors today speak of the Humber with reverence usually reserved for aircraft or tanks. Restored examples idle with a steady rhythm that feels heavier than nostalgia. Their gearboxes still clunk, their doors still close, with the weight of steel meant to keep a man alive. At shows and commemorations, the sound of a starting Humber stands apart from other engines, a deep mechanical tone that once meant authority was moving. The visual power of the design persists because it was never stylish. The proportions are deliberate, almost architectural. It sits square on its wheels, upright, unashamedly functional. In photographs, it casts shadows like a building. Modern designers cite its honesty of form, a phrase that sounds modern but describes 1940s necessity. When visitors see one in a museum, Coventry, Bovington, or Arnhem, they often mistake it for a small armoured car. Then they notice the windows, the doors, the desk. The moment of realization carries the weight of what the vehicle was, not a weapon, but a workspace, a place where wars were directed, not fought. Its legacy is not speed or innovation, but reliability, a kind of mechanical loyalty. Machines that simply work seldom enter myth. They persist quietly. The Humber 4x4's gift to history is the idea that mobility can serve thought, that power can travel without spectacle. Some restorers drive their Humbers on rural roads, engines steady at 30 miles an hour. From the outside, they look like relics. From the driver's seat, they feel like philosophy. The gear lever moves with resistance that reminds you of effort. The steering, heavy but precise, tells the story of 1941's compromise. Control traded for durability. Every movement of the wheel recalls a time when motion itself was command. The Humber's influence on post-war military thought is visible in the doctrine of mobility. No static headquarters, no fixed line. Orders move with the engine. That idea began here, in a steel box once called the Humber Heavy Utility. Echo line repeats once more, built for luxury, became endurance. The vehicles that survived beyond their war are now kept by individuals who see in them the last expression of British wartime engineering balance. Civility reforged into efficiency. They are touched up, driven, photographed, not worshipped, but understood. When the sun catches the side of one at a showground, reflections trace the same lines drawn in Coventry under blackout. Every straight edge is an answer to chaos, every bolt a reply to fear. The Humber's story does not end with its obsolescence. It ends each time someone recognizes its shape and realizes that thought, not glamour, moved the 20th century forward. There is a point in every design where purpose overtakes origin. The Humber Heavy Utility FWD began as a luxury frame, built for ease, grace and quiet. It ended as a geometry of survival, an object that looked like permanence in a world of uncertainty. Standing before one today, you see the same paradox that opened its story. The emblem says Humber, a name once spoken in showrooms and drawing rooms, now engraved on steel, made for silence. It looks neither elegant nor crude. It looks inevitable. When luxury went to war, it did not vanish. It adapted. The essence of refinement was never the polish or the trim, but the precision beneath them. Humber carried that precision into battle and gave it to the world as reliability. Creation became decay, decay became creation again. In the decades since, that lesson has never lost relevance. Every vehicle that values utility over ornament, every design that turns function into form, carries an echo of Coventry's wartime rhythm. Measure, fit, strike, check, move on. The discipline of necessity became the style of endurance. The Humber 4x4s. True legacy lies in thought, not metal. It showed that intelligence in design is not about novelty, but balance, the ability to survive change without losing identity. In war, that meant command cars that could outlast maps. In peace, it meant industries that could outlast circumstance. The survivors, a handful of restored machines in Britain and Europe, stand as proof. Their engines start with the same firm twist. Their bodies hold the same volume of air once filled by officers' voices. They are both artifact and argument. You can see the philosophy in their construction. Straight lines that speak of logic, rivets that speak of order, paint that speaks of endurance. If you listen closely in the presence of one, even when silent, you can almost hear the rhythm that built it, the hiss of air over steel, the rattle of wrenches, the sudden hum of the first start after a raid. Machines remember sound long after people forget. Those who built it are gone. The factories they worked in stand repurposed or erased. Yet the Humber name, pressed into metal plates in 1942, outlasted them all. Even in stillness, it continues to move ideas forward, luxury and labour, creation and decay, comfort and command. In the end, the Humber Heavy Utility FWD was never about warfare itself. It was about how a nation translates skill into survival. Britain turned its civility into machinery and found strength in the act of adaptation. The car became the architecture of movement, proof that civilization can be mobile. There is quiet power in that thought. It says that refinement and resilience are not opposites. They are phases of the same discipline. The same precision that once served leisure could serve endurance, and the same craftsmanship that made comfort could make continuity. History remembers tanks, planes, and ships because they shape battles. It forgets the vehicles that shape thought. The Humber 4x4 carried decisions, not headlines. It is remembered only by those who understand that in war, every command must travel, and that somewhere, under dust or rain, a machine must make that journey possible. In that truth, the Humber's story ends where it began, in paradox. The company that once sold silence as luxury built silence as endurance. Its creation decayed into service, and through that decay, creation found new form. Today, when a restored Humber rolls forward at a commemoration parade, its engine note seems older than the people watching. Yet, it still carries command, just differently. The authority now is memory, history moving under its own weight. The Humber FWD does not shout its importance, it simply endures it. And in endurance there is beauty,